Well, to discuss this, let's go to our guests. In Belgrade is Vladimir Radomirovic. He's the editor-in-chief of the investigative news outlet Pistaljka, or The Whistle. Also joining me is Professor Dejan Vuk Stankovic at the University of Belgrade. And in Sarajevo is Marija Ristic. She's the regional director of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Dejan Vuk Stankovic, let me start with you. Should Vucic be concerned? Is he in trouble?
Well, I don't think that he should be so much concerned with these protests, because those protests do not affect him so much. The latest polls shows that he is still a little bit above 50% of popular support, so he is much more popular than his opponents, especially because they do not show any signs of a rise in their ratings. So despite the fact that we have protests on a weekly basis in the last 2.5 months, Vucic is still very strong if we are considering his position in electorate.
Okay.
Also, he should not be so concerned. Okay,
let me bring in Marija Ristic and ask her if she agrees that even though people have been protesting for 2 months and they've got major issues that they're protesting, Vucic shouldn't be concerned.
Well, I think he should definitely think twice what he is doing. He is popular, and I agree with the colleague from Belgrade that he's definitely more popular than the opposition parties. But what we are seeing on the street is actually growing discontent with the people. And this is what we hadn't seen in Belgrade for a decent amount of time. And now we don't just see protests in Belgrade, but we also see it in the other cities as well. Then we also have universities or professors joining the protest. So I think this is a wake-up call for Vucic. It doesn't mean that he will go from power today, but if the issues such as rule of law and freedom of media continue, then there is a question whether he will stay.
Vladimir Radomirovic. So the protesters have accused Vucic of stifling democratic liberties, of cracking down on political opponents, of controlling the media. They believe that the country is going in the wrong direction. Is that true?
That is in large part true, because the country is not reforming as quickly as it should. And Vucic is aware of this. Even though he dismissed the first protest, after the first protest he said that he doesn't care if 5 million people show up, he will never change his politics. Since then he has said that he understands that people are dissatisfied with the condition, especially the upper middle class. And so he's aware that he needs to push for reforms much farther. And I think most protesters are really on point in pinpointing these different sorts of problems for Serbia. And I think that Vucic will definitely have to change his policies in the near future.
Dejan, does he need to change his policies?
Depends what sort of politics. I don't think that he will change his politics substantially. He will propose new elections as some sort of exit strategy for ongoing political crisis. Despite the impression that we have protests on the streets in different towns and city of Belgrade, I'm not sure that those protests are enough strong to be a real and genuine challenge for Vucic.
So
he
Dejan,
is
let me
still
ask
more
you,
popular than
certainly,
his
let me interrupt you, and I apologize for this, right? But let me ask you, how big do they need to be for you to say, okay, he must get worried now because this is a critical point? How big do they need to get?
Well, they should be more like protests during the 90s. On the 90s, you had protests on daily basis, and they were more social actors that were involved in that. At this point, I don't think that something like that is possible. So if we are considering the political life in Serbia, I think it is a little bit superficial to claim that Vucic is autocrat in a way in which Milosevic was. And Vucic is a president that was directly elected on elections. He still have very strong support. And if you are talking about the media landscape in Serbia, you cannot say that Vucic is controlling all media. He has certainly some impact on very important TV stations and newspapers, but there are also room for the opposition dailies and weeklies and TV stations. It is also very superficial to claim that he is a dictator, because I don't know that in Serbia there is no political prisoners in Serbia, and there is no political parties and organizations that are forbidden. So sometimes it is a little bit, confusive to say that we live in some sort of autocracy or dictatorship. Vucic is a strong politician. He has authority, but that authority is won by people's support. And I'm not sure that it is plausible to claim, and it is rationally plausible to claim, that he is an autocrat in a way in which Milosevic was.
Okay.
This country, by its constitution, is a liberal democracy, and if you want to be in a government, you should win elections.
Okay, so let's get Marija
results
to
of
respond
these
to that.
elections were recognized by all political.
Certainly. Okay, so let's get Marija. Marija, those words that many of the protesters have used, autocrat, dictator, do you agree with Dejan that yes, there might be problems, but calling the man an autocrat, a dictator, that's inaccurate, that's unfair, and it's irrational?
Well, Vucic is definitely not Milosevic, but we are also not liberal democracy. Vucic's government, and he as the president, and his leadership, that all has characteristic of the authoritarian regime. It doesn't mean that it's fully authoritarian like some regimes that we know, some of them was Milosevic as well, but it has, for example, grip on two very important elements of the illiberal democracy. And one of them is freedom of media and freedom of speech. The other is actually rule of law. So we have a significant influence from the government coming on the most of the mainstream media, either through ownership or through political pressure. Then we have other element, which is that we actually don't have free judiciary. So there is a constant pressure on prosecutors, on judges, and on different kind of elements that constitute judicial authorities. So for example, in these two areas, and this is what European Union also says in their progress report, this is where we are not advancing towards what one democratic society should be. So it is definitely not Milosevic, but it is also not liberal democracy.
Vladimir Radomirovic, for those who would look at the protests and ask the simple question, is this about freedom and democracy, or is this about economics? Is it one or the other, or both?
I think it's both. You cannot divide the two. And in the past 10 years, as far as I remember, in every opinion poll, three topics topped all opinion polls. It's unemployment, corruption, and Kosovo. And I think Vucic needs to address corruption at this point. Being an editor of an anti-corruption website, we report almost daily on big corruption cases involving mid-level and senior-level politicians. And we haven't seen any closure in most of these cases, including the case of the current finance minister, Sinisa Mali, who was suspected of money laundering 10 years ago. But this case was never really investigated. We never had any sort of prosecutorial engagement in the case. And the Minister of Finance of Serbia, we know this from documents that were released by the Anti-Corruption Agency, has offshore accounts in several jurisdictions across the globe. And to have a finance minister who made his money in Serbia and doesn't pay taxes in the country is really ridiculous.
Is there too much corruption, Dejan?
Well, I think that Vucic should be focused on corruption more than he's focused right now. He needs results in that field, and I completely agree with Mr. Radomirovic that he should initiate combat against corruption on systematic grounds. Also, all those cases should be resolved, and I think that is a real challenge for him. Corruption and, of course, advancement of the rule of the law, as Ms. Ristic just said. So I think that those fields are very important for him, and the success of his government will be measured according to those two criteria: how much and to what extent he could make progress in that fields. That will also describe, that will be important for judgment about his policy. So those two areas which my colleagues mentioned are very important for, not just for Vucic, but for Serbia, for this society. And I think that government should work more on these two areas. That's quite correct.
Marija Ristic, one of the issues that Vladimir brought up was the issue of Kosovo. We heard very recently Hashim Thaçi sending a message to Donald Trump, sending a letter saying, we're close to a deal with Serbia. How important is Kosovo to those people on the streets, and how much of an issue is it right now when it comes to what makes them unsettled and unhappy about their current situation?
Protesters at one point had like a demand for Vucic to actually start really talking to people and bringing the deal on Kosovo. And the protesters said that they believe that Kosovo is really important part of Serbia. But I think that most of these demands are actually irrational, and that if you would ask like general people in Serbia what are their main concerns, they wouldn't say that that's Kosovo. I think they would mention that it's actually corruption, economy, and other matters. So I think that Kosovo is more or less manipulated in all these political talks simply because it's a hot topic, and this is something that EU is demanding and the international community in general to resolve this long-standing dispute with Kosovo. But I think to normal and regular people on the street, I don't believe that that's an issue. The other problem is, of course, that these people are also manipulated by what is coming from the mainstream media and from the politician, and that is that Kosovo is actually part of Serbia, and that's very important for Kosovo to remain as part of Serbia, as it's said in our constitution. But in reality, actually, the situation is completely different. Serbia and Kosovo are completely two different territories. They're two different states, and we live in completely separated, I would say, worlds. There are people who live there and who are Serbs and who are in a way controlled by the Belgrade authorities. But in essence, we are speaking completely about two different countries. And this is the reality that Vucic knows, but he's not telling it simply because it means that he will lose points. And this is one of the reasons why he's actually trying to find a solution with Hashim Thaçi, but really trying to frame it differently to the public, because one of his politics and how he came to power, it was actually the story about Kosovo and not giving up on that part of once Serbia.
Yeah, and it is undoubtedly an emotional issue. I was in North Mitrovica just after Oliver Ivanovic was killed. There was a lot of saber rattling going on by both sides, right? So Vladimir, is Marija right that Kosovo is actually just this emotional tool used to manipulate people by the politicians, or it's more of a bread and butter issue that people deeply care about and want resolved right now?
It's a very emotional issue for all of Serbs, I think, and it's easy to manipulate feelings with such an emotional issue. But if anything were to happen to the remaining Serbs in Kosovo, you would never be able to reach any sort of deal between Belgrade and Pristina. And I think for Vucic to sell any sort of a deal with Hashim Thaci or Ramush Haradinaj, he would need to control more of the media in Serbia than he is controlling now. And this is, I think, also where the interests of the EU and the US may at one point align with Vucic's interests, because if you want to sell any sort of deal where Serbia will recognize Kosovo, you need to control the media. And I don't think that, in any case, Serbs will accept a deal where Serbia will have to recognize Kosovo. Whether there will be partition or something else, we still don't know, but it's really an emotional issue and it will be hard to sell.
Okay, we have 30 seconds left in the segment. Dejan, I want to give you the final comment, briefly please, sir, on Kosovo. Go ahead.
Well, it's a very difficult issue, and I don't see how it will be solved in the near future, because both sides have completely different approaches and different expectations from the negotiation process which is happening in Brussels right now.
Okay. Dejan Vuk Stankovic, Vladimir Radomirovic and Marija Ristic, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us.